Welcome to the Parish the Thought Show. The opinions of Brian, your host, and his guests have not been sanitized or scientifically tested, so please consume at your own risk. Now, here's Brian.
Ladies and gentlemen, and whoever else is listening, welcome back to the program. I have some special guests today who I've been stalking for a couple of years now. Cynthia Winward and Susan Hinckley, the hosts of the At Last She Said It podcast. And what your tagline is, Women of Faith talking about complicated things. Is that kind
something
of
like that?
Yeah.
Nailed it.
Yeah. And Cynthia, I think I heard you on Questions from the Closet when it used to be called Questions from the Closet several years ago. And that's how I found out about you guys, and have just kind of been a fanboy ever since, and love what you're doing, because I've never really paid attention to the imbalance and feminist type issues ever, because I'm a white dude. I didn't have to, but I raised 3 daughters in the LDS church and now see things that I never saw before, and now I can't unsee them. So anyway, take it away. Tell us about your show and what you do and the why, and I want to know why you guys started doing this. And you both, just give us a little history on both of you, if you would.
I guess one of us should take it, Susan.
I guess so. Take it away, Cynthia.
Gee, thanks a lot. Susan and I were friends moderating an online Facebook group because, we don't live in the same state even. And so we were, as moderators, it was a heavily moderated group. And so behind the scenes, the moderators would always talk and, all about the different things going on in the group. And Susan and I would just constantly say to each other, why isn't anyone talking about this? Why isn't there a podcast about this? Specifically like women's issues. And so finally we were like, well, I guess we should do it since we hadn't heard it. And this was 5 years ago. There are a lot more podcasts by women in the LDS space now. But back then there were quite a bit fewer. So we decided if we want to see something, I guess we have to be the ones to put it out there in the world. So that's how it started.
Yeah, you're be the change you want to see.
Exactly.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. You started it, but what were you guys feeling that made you want? I mean, because I know through all the shows I've heard you guys talk about just the things you see, and nothing's changing. It's all the same patriarchal stuff. And did you have words for it when you started feeling it, or have you been feeling like this your whole life as members of the church?
Cynthia and I have had pretty different experiences as members of the church, both lifelong members, but we're different enough in personality, really, and in sort of the way that we have felt as members of the church, that very often in our conversations, one of the most interesting things was the meeting of those two perspectives. And it was always eye-opening to me to understand that someone else was having a completely different experience than I was. And, I didn't realize that. But in talking to Cynthia, that was made clear to me again and again. And so that's part of what made us want to start having these conversations, is to help women understand that there's actually a huge diversity of experience among Latter-day Saint women. But we often go to church on Sunday and say the same things. We talk about the same things. We use the same vocabulary. And it would be pretty easy to make the assumption that all the women in the room felt the same about things, when in reality, nothing could be further from the truth. So we just wanted to make space to have conversations that we didn't feel like were happening, both to create space for ourselves, but also to invite other women to have a place that they could also express the things that they'd basically just been, carrying around, pondering in their hearts their whole lives. It's been astonishing how many women have come to us and said, I don't have one person in my real life that I can say these things to.
Right.
They'll come and spill their guts to us, but they don't have a single person in their circle that they can say these things out loud to. And what kind of way is that to live, right? How is that healthy for your spirit or conducive to growth or anything else? That's living in a box. And so we decided to bust that box.
I think these women say that because they genuinely have tried and can't find anyone, or they just haven't, or they're afraid to even say something.
I think both. For me, it was definitely a combination of both things. I don't describe myself as ever having had a faith crisis, but I do describe myself as having had a silence crisis because eventually I just came to the place where I had to be able to say some of this stuff or I was going to die. I couldn't live that way anymore. My faith had come to the end of what it could do in silence, really. And so I had to have some room to expand, and that was going to include making a little bit of noise. But even at the time that we started, really, I didn't have people in my life that I could say these things to. These weren't conversations, that I'd been having with my husband of 37 years at that time or 38 years. We weren't talking about these things. I didn't feel at liberty to say them out loud. So,
Cynthia, is that what your experience is? Is it similar?
Mine's a little bit different, but I do agree that there's very little room in the organization to voice when things are different, whether that's like at a family reunion, whether that's in a Relief Society room. I mean, I remember actually being at a family reunion, and after all the kids were put to bed, the talk kind of turned to churchy stuff, and they were talking about the temple, and I kind of got the courage to speak up and be like, this has always been hard for me at the temple, and named a few things. And then I just kind of got a talking to, and it was like, oh, okay, message received. Like, don't take our most sacred ceremonies in our church that happen in the temple and say out loud, like, I don't know if I'm really okay with certain things because you're going to be met with frustration, maybe some finger wagging, or, worse, head patting, like, oh, it'll be okay, just keep going more. And it's like, none of that is working for me. So I didn't really have a silence crisis like Susan had, but I can definitely see how for so many women, the message is to stay silent about the things that are kind of itchy for you. And I'm not okay with that. Like, I feel like in most ways I've been able to find a way to speak up about the things that are hard, but in other instances, like the family reunion I just described for you, it was like, oh, okay, there are certain things though that are taboo, and we don't talk about the taboo things.
and there are a lot of good reasons, really, why it doesn't feel safe for a lot of women to speak up because people's relationships can be on the line. Even really foundational ones, relationships with their parents, siblings, spouse, or partner. Their jobs can be on the line. Their church callings or standing in their ward can be on the line, which also can have a rolling impact. It can impact their children and their experience in the church and in the neighborhood, depending on where you're living. And so there's a lot riding on looking like you are willing to toe the line, I guess, as a Latter-day Saint, and looking like you're willing to fit comfortably within the mold. So when that's not the case, it can feel pretty scary and for very good reasons.
Susan, do you remember we had a woman come to one of our Zoom meetings in the last few months, and she said that she was a grandmother and she had voiced a lot of her concerns to her adult children. And so one of her children started limiting the amount of contact that she was allowed to have with her grandchildren.
Right.
So, I mean, it's real. Like, this isn't anything we're making up. Like, it goes from top down and all the way bottom down to like not being able to have relationships with your grandkids if you dare to say certain things out loud. Like, it's very radioactive for some people to hear that not everyone is having the same experience, and they want to protect their children, in this case, from what's the word, Susan? Like the poison of a grandmother who dares to think differently. I don't know. Like it's heartbreaking. It's
Yeah.
heartbreaking
Yeah.
to me.
Poisoning the well. And
Yeah.
I've been in the church for 30 years and I never questioned anything, or I just kind of went along and did what you did. And up until like 3 years ago, 4 years ago. And I wonder why we're so afraid to say, wait a minute, this isn't making sense. That isn't making sense. Do you think it's the perfection, or this is the perfect, the church is true, the people aren't, that whole mentality of like,
Yep.
we are perfect, or we have the perfect knowledge, all those poor souls in the world don't. It's our job to, educate them. And do you think that's where this comes from, that we're afraid to? What's the quote? It's attributed to J. Reuben Clark that if we have the truth, that we shall not fear. If we don't have the truth,
Right.
Is that what?
Yeah.
I think I'm slaughtering it, but
That's a great quote. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's a good quote. Do you mind if I turn the question back on you because of
please.
something that you said at the beginning of this conversation? You mentioned having raised 3 daughters and that now you're seeing things that you cannot unsee. And so what are the ramifications, do you feel like, of not being able to unsee some things once you've seen them? Do you feel like that does have an impact on your church life and maybe on your personal spiritual life?
Yeah, it does. And it's I wouldn't say it's taken me to dark places, but I've been doing research and just if this gospel, this church is the perfection, the perfect model that we've been taught that it is, then I started asking, like, why are so many people leaving? If it's so amazing, why would you walk away from this? So I did start asking. I started going down, listening to shows like yours, and I have a queer daughter who came out 3 or 4 years ago. So I've gone down the LGBT path, just learning.
Right.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think I've become a feminist, as weird as that sounds. Just seeing all the,
That doesn't sound weird. That's great.
That's
to me,
great.
in my brain, I'm like, what? Because I used to make fun of, just whiny women. Just, that was my hardcore conservative perspective, was these
Right.
whiny women and their feminazis, the Rush Limbaugh used to call feminazis and all these
Oof,
things.
yeah.
I bought into all that stuff because like I say, the world's set up for me. Church is set up for me. I don't have to question anything. But it was actually my missionary daughter who mentioned, she's like, Dad, the sexism out here is ridiculous. And I was blown away.
Where did she
She would
serve
say
her
that.
mission, if you don't mind?
Arkansas. So it's
okay.
a foreign country.
Yes. Interesting.
So, and she is like Nephi. She has the faith of Nephi. And so when she said that, it really made my ears perk up, because I have 2 other daughters who have left and they said similar things. And I never paid attention because I didn't agree with them politically. So I've done the apology tour to them for not listening when they were saying the same things. But when, the one that's in the club still, she says it. Oh, it makes sense now that she says it. And now just the whole, the garments, the whole, and Cynthia, you said something that stuck with me. I think you said, there isn't any decision a woman can make in this faith that can't be undone by a dude. I think you said man, but I said dude.
You said dude. I said, yeah.
Yeah. And
absolutely true.
wow. So now I see that, and it's hard. And my wife's okay. She's like, I don't mind. She's like, I don't mind the roles. I'm okay with it.
Yeah.
I'm not.
Yeah.
Yeah, but a lot of women are.
But those women have their space, Susan. Like recently we had someone say in our social media something like, well, if I don't believe in patriarchy, is there room for me? And I'm like, what do you mean? All the room is for you. Like, you have the whole room.
Right.
Like, it's those of us who are swimming, Susan and I are swimming up current, when we're trying to get people to understand, like, there are elements of our amazing church that hurt people, and can we talk about them at the least? And so there are plenty of women and men in the church where like I don't see it and I'm fine with the parameters that are set. And it's like, that's awesome. So glad you're happy. That's really great. But can there be room for others with different experiences?
Yeah,
Well, the reason I wanted to ask you the question, Brian, is when this starts to happen for people, that they're starting to see things that they haven't seen before, the landscape can start to look pretty different pretty fast. And it can be really, it can feel incredibly destabilizing. People describe it as, you know, the rug being pulled out from under them, or like their foundation, suddenly they're questioning everything that they've built their life on. And so I feel like that is why it's important for us to be having these conversations so that when, I mean, we're in a very connected and very small world now that we live in, right? And so there, people are going to be running into things that I didn't run into. You know, I'm older than both of you are, and you know, I just didn't know a lot of things that today's youth are definitely going to be exposed to. But it's hard when you're in the situation where you're seeing things for the first time. I have this group of friends who are 80-year-old women. I hang out with women who are, you know, 20 years older than I am, in large part because I love the perspective that they give me. But them being on this podcast journey with me has been really interesting because it is rocking their world. And I feel really, really bad that that's happening to them at age
At 80.
80, right? That's hard when that's happening at 80. It was hard for me when it happened to me at 50. It's been hard for my daughters, you know, going through it in their 20s and 30s. But if we could do anything that could broaden and strengthen the base, I guess, of what is acceptable experience in our church, that positions us to move forward, because the church has got to be built to go forward on the shoulders of young people, of the members of the future. That's who the church has to be for in order for it to be a living thing and remain a living thing. And we're not in a position right now where we're prepared to do that, I guess I would say. And so I feel like the main goal really of our podcast is to get people having conversations that make space for the full diversity of experience. We need to acknowledge what's already going on, and the thoughts that are already happening in the room during a gospel doctrine lesson. We need to be able to talk about those, not just the most acceptable or the ideal thoughts, but all the ones that are actually there, because pretending that they're not there does nothing to prepare us to take the next step into the future.
Well, it drives us underground.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Just,
Or right out.
or out.
Right.
I just know that there's 3 or 4 guys in my neighborhood who were all in a similar perspective of things, and we have to. I don't say we have to, but we have this little, I call it the underground apostate group, where we just talk about our thoughts and things that we've heard, and
That's awesome.
we shouldn't have to feel. And I do feel like I have to be discreet about it.
Right.
Yeah, of course.
One, from, you know, my wife's perspective. My wife is, you know, it's harder for her. This is not easy for us right now, just because I'm in a different space than she is.
That's
She's
really
like, you know,
hard.
You have the right to do that, and I have the right to be upset by it. And she's right. Things just don't make sense to me anymore like they used to. And maybe it's because I never questioned before. I just did. That's just what you do. You just do those things. You do the temple. You do this. You do that. You do all the right things. And if you're not getting the answers, just keep doing more of the right things.
Right.
You get the answer we want you to get.
And that's very often the advice we get, right? Whatever it is that's hard, it's like, do it more. I mean,
It doesn't work.
it doesn't. I mean, maybe for some people it does. I want to leave room for that. But for me, like, I had a stake president tell me 15 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, when, you know, if the temple is hard for you, go more, and then, you know, you'll have the experiences that you're supposed to have. And I just thought, okay, I mean, at the time I was a little bit of a runner, and I thought, yeah, I hate running. But the more I did it, I was like, okay, I hate it a little bit less, you know, so I'll do this. But the more I went, the more I was just exposed to the things that were hard for me over and over and over till it got to the point where I was like, I'm not okay with this. So it goes back to what Susan said a minute ago about the exposure. Like for me, it might have been, being exposed to something that was already hard for me and just going, yeah, this is hard and it's not getting better. For you, Brian, maybe your exposure to your daughter's experience on her mission and having a queer daughter. Like, I just feel like Susan said, the world is getting smaller for so many of us due to our digital lives. So maybe you don't have a child who is LGBTQ, but I guarantee, people listening have a friend who has a child who's LGBTQ or something. And so that just kind of tightens our world down where it's like everybody knows somebody who has a gay kiddo or who has a feminist partner, male or female, who, struggles with the temple, struggles with, an all male clergy. Like we all know someone at this point who does. And so just being able to understand the people who feel differently, I think could go a long way in our ministry. And then at some point, that person might be you. Like you said, this only happened for you 3 years ago. This is a new space for you. And so for many of our listeners as well, it's a new space because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once your kiddo comes out of the closet, you can't unsee how like, oh, our church really privileges straight people. It's a lot easier if you get married in the temple. It's not so easy if your sweetheart is of the same sex and that's not allowed for you. So, yeah, we bump up against it eventually at some point.
I think ideally what I'd like to see is us get to a place where we're not really interested in changing people's minds, but understanding them. And that's kind of my philosophy on everything, but especially in church too. It's like, I don't care if you, even with like the ministering or home teaching as it used to be called, how about we just have this just a basic principle of love your neighbor, period. Not love them to hopefully you become a project or you get them back into the club, but just love them because they're there. And it takes so much pressure off that practice.
Yeah.
Just love them because everyone seems to be a project, and I may be somebody's project one of these days. I don't know.
You probably are, Brian. You might, if you're in the underground
You're going to be now.
apostate group. Yeah.
Yeah. My 12 listeners that I have here will out me.
Yeah. Well, I recently found out I'm a project to somebody in my neighborhood, and it really hurt because I thought we were sort of friends, like not friends who go out for French fries and hang out, but nobody likes being a project. Like you said, people just want to be loved and accepted for who they are.
What did that look like when you said you found out you were? I mean, how did you know, or what was that process?
I just found out through the grapevine that she had been talking about my spirituality with other people, saying she's worried for me. And I'm like, as a woman who's over 50, don't you get tired? Like, I've raised my children. I'm an empty nester now. Like, my kids tease me because I like dogs, but I won't get a dog. And they're like, oh, you're not coming out of retirement even for a dog. Nope. I cannot care for one more living creature. I cannot be responsible. So to hear about a woman who's, my age, who is so worried about me, I'm like, aren't you tired of worrying about other people like I am? I just want to, like you said, I just want to love them and serve them and be like, they know what's best for their life. What the heck do I know about what's best for their life? So yeah, it's kind of surprising to me. And it's hurtful, of course. I mean, everyone's default is I would rather have everybody adore me, but the older I get, the more I'm like, I'm not for everyone. Our podcast isn't for everyone. And so, of course, when you say the quiet parts out loud, people are going to start whispering about you and trying to bring you back to the fold, so to speak.
And for one thing, because it makes them feel better, I think, Cynthia.
Yeah.
It feels scary when you see other people stepping off the path, I guess, is
Well, and
the way I'd say it.
we're kind of taught to not. I mean, it's in general conference. Don't talk to the unbelievers, or things like
Right,
that. That
right,
is the real thing.
right.
Don't ask, because I don't want the answer. I mean, I remember, don't listen to Mormon stories. Oh, that's the devil. Don't go down those roads. I'm like, well, like normal kid, I'm like, tell me not to. I want to know why.
Mm.
Right.
But it's fascinating, people's stories in and out. It's just information.
Well, in a few minutes ago, you used, was it that J. Reuben Clark quote where
Yeah.
it's about like did that quote continue with our truths can withstand scrutiny? Something
Yes.
about
If
that,
we have the
right?
Yeah.
truth,
Yeah.
we shall not
Yeah.
fear. If we do not
Yeah.
have the truth, then it ought to be questioned, or something like that.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, if this club has all the truths that we've said, then it should be able to withstand absolutely anything.
100%.
So why not ask? Why not talk about it? What's the fear?
Right.
Well, now I'm
Right.
understand. I'm in the research I've done, and probably the research you've done. You see what people are afraid of now.
Hmm.
I think people are afraid that, well, I think the phrase actually used in General Conference a couple of years ago, and I don't remember who it was warning against us rehearsing our doubts with the doubters, right? Don't rehearse your
Doubt your
doubts.
doubts.
Well, no, it wasn't doubt your doubts. It's like
Oh,
don't get together with other doubters and rehearse your doubts, right? So it was kind of talking about basically, I think probably mostly like online groups where discussion was going on, very much like the one
Absolutely.
Cynthia and I. Yeah, this is what they're talking about. So the thing about not rehearsing your doubts is what is what other choice do you like if you don't speak your doubts, then I guess I guess we're just supposed to shove them down. I don't know. What are they wanting us to do? Asking a question is expressing a doubt, right? There is no other way to ask a question, is there?
Mm.
And this, I mean, isn't the whole church built around one boy's experience of asking a question? I don't really understand our fear, I guess, of thoughtful and honest questioning. I don't feel like that's necessarily the same thing as doubt. But I do feel like a lot of people get scared off conversation with people like you and your friends, podcasts like At Last She Said It, where we're talking to people who have questions and we're asking questions out loud. I mean, that is important. What do 4-year-olds do all day? They ask questions. They're trying to understand the contours of their world. They're trying to figure it out. And if we never have an opportunity to do that, then I don't see how we get to any kind of robust personal faith.
agreed. Again, it's information. It's just information.
It's information,
You know,
and you got to have it.
how is that threatening? But I guess, like, having that rug pulled out from underneath you, because I've thought, oh my gosh, what if what I've devoted my life to for 30 years,
Right?
my brain went there, like, what if it's not even real? What if it's made up? I
Hmm.
don't know.
Yeah.
What if it
So
is?
wrestle with that.
And I've just devoted 30 years of time and money. Like, wow, that's frustrating.
Mm.
Was I overtly lied to about something? I don't know. But you start going, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
How do you continue to, one of the questions I think I had for you guys is, do you feel like with your show, like that you're making a difference, and that the ship is starting to right itself because of some of the efforts that you guys are putting out there? Do you feel like it's making a difference? I mean, other than maybe personal conversations, I hear the audios that people leave after your shows. I love those.
Hmm. Hmm.
They're heartbreaking, a lot of them.
Hmm.
So I guess you are making a difference, at least one-on-one.
Yeah, that was only our only goal was to affect the individual who listened, men or women,
Right.
because we are under no pretenses that we can change anything at the top. But once a woman changes or a man changes, they can interact differently if they so choose with their ward. I mean, maybe they won't. Maybe it's too scary, but they can interact differently, at least in their own spiritual lives. And that right there can be so refreshing to just be like, I'm going to pray differently. I'm going to study my scriptures differently, or I'm not going to study my scriptures right now. I'm going to, focus on these other books. Anything that's a devotional to them, like that may just start looking different. And maybe after that, she'll want to expand and then start interacting differently with her ward or maybe with her family. But that was never our intention, was to change anything at the top. Funnily enough, I remember a few years ago, we had a podcast episode called What Women Don't Get, and it was kind of my snarky rebuttal to like a famous LDS public speaker who gave a talk called What Women Do Get. And on the surface, like it doesn't sound bad. Like when you listen to her speak, it's like, oh yeah, women, we get a lot. But I was like, yeah, but we're not telling the whole story here. Let's talk about the things that women don't get. And so on this episode, we talked about like even things that don't require priesthood ordination, we still don't get. Like a woman can't be a stake auditor. Like I have a degree in finance. I think I'd be really good. I'm really good with numbers. That would be fantastic. And then a year later, women got to be stake auditors. So I don't know. I'm just saying we put it out there in the universe and something changed. I'm sure it has nothing to do with us, but maybe someone heard it and they were like, oh yeah, but this doesn't require priesthood ordination to, look at receipts and things like that. So I don't know. We've had a few experiences like that where we talked about things and then lo and behold, certain things kind of change, but who knows? Maybe it was just the collective, Susan and I are definitely not the only ones talking about these things. So it could have just been the collective uproar.
I was going to say it was at least one drop of water, Cynthia. And if you get enough drops of water, then, things are going to move under it for
Spreading that poison.
Exactly. Or something.
Something.
I don't like to think of it as poison, but yes, some obviously would.
Spreading the seeds of change.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, yeah.
We're under no illusions that we have any power to change anything in answer to your question.
Well, I think there's this we all want to change the world, right?
Absolutely.
Who doesn't?
Yep.
And I think what stops us is we think we have to change the world.
Right. Right.
Our world.
Instead of our world.
Right.
Because I can't, I can influence my family or, make in my little community. That's where I can at least make a ripple.
Right. Right.
Which is how things
get
done.
I remember years ago saying to a bishop, the advice that you gave to my family on this certain issue made things worse. And at the time he was like, well, I stand by what I said. And I was like, of course you do. And then like a year later, we had a little bit of a follow-up conversation. And he said, I want you to know, Cynthia, I handle these types of situations differently now because of you. So that was my world. That didn't change anything in the world. But you're right, Brian, in my little circle, my tiny baby little circle of influence, that bishop's long been released, but yeah, he said, I'm going to do things differently. So personally, as someone who likes to speak up and be heard, that's easy for me to just kind of say to a bishop, can we do things differently this way? Sometimes it lands well. Sometimes it doesn't. I've had plenty of pushback from bishops, and then I'm like, okay, he's not willing to show curiosity for my experience. But more often than not, I've been met with, okay, tell me more. So why not test the waters and see? Because you never know. Maybe you can change a few things in your tiny little sphere of influence.
That is the hope, yes.
Well, and I definitely changed things for myself. And so that's had a huge impact on the way I'm living the rest of my life going forward. And I don't really know what change I could possibly affect that would be more impactful, I guess, for me than that. And so, if I had to privilege the importance of one kind of change over another, I guess I would have to privilege changing myself. And that is something that I very much had power to do. And that has happened as a result of this podcast.
And I think that's especially you, Susan, have modeled that for our listeners. Because more often than not, we get letters saying, I am just like Susan, someone who's quiet and introverted. And there's just no way that they're gonna, be a loudmouth like me and go to a bishop or write a stake president and say, looky here.
You're our hero, though, Cynthia. You're our hero.
Well, bless you. But
You give
I'm
us all
just
hope.
saying, and is that our conditioning in the church that we women kind of are conditioned to play nice and take direction? I mean, certainly that's part of it. And then, obviously plenty of people are shy or quiet or introverted. And so that's just not something they're going to do. But I know it's meant the world to our listeners, for so many to say, I'm just like Susan. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for making me feel less alone. Because it was enough for them, like it is for Susan, that their world changed. They changed inside and they were okay with that change and loved that change about themselves. What could be better than that?
I know that just my own personal change that I have in the last 5, 6, 7 years, where I was just very, very hard right conservative thinking on everything and was frustrated and angry all the time and always afraid of anything that was not in my understanding of life and politics. And when I stopped doing that and just started asking questions and trying to understand people, not change them, it's amazing how free that is. And I use this example a lot. Do you remember in The Grinch with Jim Carrey at the end when his heart's growing? You remember that scene? Either one of you? And he's like, it was like freaking him out. And he's like, I'm leaking, because he was so happy. That's how I can identify what I've gone through. I'm not frustrated. I'm not angry at people. I don't care what your opinion is. I just want to understand how you got to that. And just opening the dialogue for conversation, just to understand each other. Because isn't that what the gospel? We listen and we love each other and try to understand each other.
Yeah.
And it's mind blowing how I'm just not frustrated. And my poor wife's probably just relieved finally, because I've been pounding this drum for 25 years of negativity and fear. And so just kind of take that into the church and like, tell me your story. If someone was leaving the church or coming into the church, I always would say, it's like, I'm fascinated by people's stories in and out, for whatever reason.
How common do you think that is, though, Brian? The curiosity, like I've heard you say that over and over, like you just want to understand how other people got to their ideas. You don't necessarily want to change that. As you're saying that, I'm like, can you turn that into a vitamin? And can we pass it out? Because that would be fantastic.
Well,
but in all honesty, like, how common is that? And do you see that changing more? Like, I say the same thing. Like, can people just be curious? Like, that's the number one thing I would change in our church, is just curiosity. Be curious.
that's a new vitamin C, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
New vitamin C.
Well, no, I don't think it's common. And it wasn't for me. I was just, no, this is what my tribe says. This is how you do it. And
okay,
we don't buck the system. That's just how it is. And anyone who questions that, they're the devil and they're trying to sway you. And I've found that I've been slammed by, people that used to be in my club. They're like, you've just been, how dare you even talk to those other people, those other sides. And no, I don't think it's common at all. And that's what I'm trying. That's, I guess, my mission. And now is to try to, I'm going to seek out someone on the surface I may not agree with, just to try to understand them, to try to
understand them. Yeah.
Because I think just talking to people, and we feel like if we talk to someone that's in another camp, then we're caving in our values or something.
Right.
Yeah.
By asking the question, maybe. I just
Yeah.
don't think that's the case anymore. So
I think sometimes in the church too, people are afraid that it's like, you can catch it. This is something you can catch if
A
you talk
virus.
to the other people, right? And so
virus of
we're scared
curiosity.
of it. Exactly. Can I ask you a follow-up question based on the experience that you've just described?
Of course.
So I really want to know, as a white hetero male, who self-describes as having been, super conservative. Was there one precipitating event that opened a crack maybe for you that caused you to start to look deeper at things? I mean, I know that like overall, raising daughters and all these things, sure, your eyes got open gradually, but was there one thing that was the thing that somehow started all of this?
Yes. It was when Obama won the first term. I
Hmm.
was in a Facebook group with some very articulate people, and I was staunch in my conservatism, and this guy was extremely liberal left. In fact, I've had him on my show 4 times because he doesn't think like me. I would just watch what he said. He's so articulate. And I'm like, I can't beat it. I hated everything he said. Hated it.
But he said it so well.
Articulate. He said it so well. I'm like, I can't beat this guy. And that's what my mentality is like. I got to beat him. And
Interesting.
so I just started listening to him and then started asking him. I'm like, maybe I'll just ask him some questions and maybe I'll just try to learn, because I was so tired of being frustrated and angry all the time. And he was always polite. He wasn't a bomb thrower. He was just good. He would articulate his points and not destroy people, but they would definitely lose the argument. And that made me start wondering if people like, why do you still have him as a friend? He's such a jerk. I'm like, well, because he doesn't think like me. And even my brother, who's one of my best friends, has worked for the California State University system for 30 years. So very liberal perspectives in the university system. And I love and respect him. And he would always say, when I got on these right-wing tirades, he's like, maybe think about it this way. Because I respected him, I just started, maybe he's right. Maybe I don't have maybe my team doesn't have all the right answers. Maybe there's a different perspective. So it wasn't like one event, but just sort of
it seems like kind of one relationship, though, that really crystallized it for you. That was one interaction, one person you interacted with. I do too.
Yeah. And I've never met him in person, but we're still digital friends. And if I want a different perspective, I'll reach out to him and say, what do you think about this? And I was going to run for city council at one point. And I said, I want you to be my advisor from afar. If I did it, of course I didn't do it because I didn't want that torment. But anyway, so it's been, and now I just, that's what I try to do all the time.
That gives me enormous hope as a podcaster, actually, because I mean, this tells me that if we can get people who might not normally be interested in the things that we're talking about, if we can get people to listen to one of our conversations, I mean, maybe even just one, it could open a crack for them where they could start to feel curious maybe about other people's experiences.
Yeah, just, things that make them go, right? Isn't there a song about that?
Yes, there is.
Yeah.
Make you maybe, okay, never thought about that way. Or tell me more. Tell me more about that instead of just shutting down. And anyway, but, and you guys, you're definitely doing that, you ladies, with your show. I look forward to every week when I hear a new topic come out. Then, you're doing great things. You're doing great things in the world. And I appreciate all that you're doing.
You're very kind. Thank you.
Yeah, I've learned a lot. You guys have helped me grow a bit. So,
well, it means a lot to us to have you and other men also as listeners, because without men joining this conversation can't go anywhere. We have to have men who are willing to listen, and not just willing to listen, but interested enough to engage in the conversation.
Yeah, and start asking some harder questions. When I had
Right.
Amy McPhee-Alabest from Breaking Down Patriarchy on a couple weeks ago, I was hesitant to say this, but I said, Amy, I almost feel arrogant to say this, but if guys don't step up and do things, nothing's going to change.
You got that right.
And I still feel weird saying that. He's like, who am I? But that's right. I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, I think
absolutely not wrong.
I think we all have stations in life where we realize, I'll speak for myself, where I realize like, oh, this is a place where I can maybe move the needle a little bit where I have some privilege. I mean, as a cisgender woman, I try to speak up for my transgender friends, and they thank me for it, or other parents who have trans kiddos will be like, "Oh my gosh, thank you for talking about this." And I just think, when you have a privilege in a certain area, I think that's actually what discipleship calls us to do. I think that's exactly what Jesus did, is he was just trying to shed light on the people that society had cast out. And he did a great job at it. And I think that's what we're called to emulate, is to use our discipleship to help lift others. And for you as a straight, white, heterosexual man, you have tremendous privilege there. And I do in other different areas. So I try to do what I can. So I think I think that's just part of being a good citizen. And then as Latter-day Saints, being good disciples, is realizing where we could use our voices to lift those around us who maybe society won't take as seriously as they should, which is heartbreaking, but that's when we need to speak up.
I think that's beautiful and absolutely true. And I love thinking about it from that angle. And just more pragmatically, when we're talking about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, then we're talking about an organizational structure in which Cynthia and I will never have power to affect change on anything. We'll never be in the meetings. It's men who are going to be in those meetings as the church organization is currently constituted. We have no avenue to affect change at this point. But you could. And so we really, in the strictest sense, absolutely do have to have men who are willing to take up these conversations and try to advance women's issues within the church. We can't advance them for ourselves.
Mm-hmm. That's heartbreaking, but I see that.
It's heartbreaking to admit.
It's heartbreaking to admit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it's a lot of what sits behind the fact that I can no longer feel any sorrow at all, really, that my daughters are not in the church. Because why would I ask them to be part of an organization where they really, bottom line, have no power, no organizational power, and won't have it? I mean, maybe eventually things will change. They might. It'd be great if they did. I'd love it if my daughters and granddaughters would be in the church. But as it stands now, there are just other places in their lives where they have a lot more power to affect change and to drive their own experience. And our church is just not that place right now. I wish it were.
Well, and not just power, Susan, because I don't know, but Brian, you might have some listeners who are like, I don't want power. I really am happy with the structure. Okay, but what about representation? Like, do women deserve greater representation in the church? And I would argue yes, because there are some women who have influence, right? Who sit on a ward council or a state council. And of course, we know we have general female leaders who sit on different committees and such. But having influence is one thing. Having power to affect decisions is another thing. And like the representation is maybe, well, that kind of goes along with the power, because we don't have a majority, or even, we don't have equality of numbers of women who serve in leadership. And like I said earlier, yeah, there's nothing that I can do in this church that can't be overruled by a man. But that's kind of the angle I always like to bring up when we start talking about, yeah, women, we don't have power in the church, because plenty are like, well, I don't want power. And it's like, okay, but do you want to be represented? Do you want to be represented? Because I don't think our church can continue to say there are gender differences. Men are different than women, because it's like, well, then don't we need both of those point of views in the room to help us make those decisions? So yeah, either the church has to stop saying that there are differences between the genders, because then we're all just the same, or they need to start acknowledging that those differences matter and those differences belong in the rooms where it happens. Full stop.
Yeah. And I think along with influence goes voice. And we're in a power differential right now where basically women's voices are valued to the extent that women are called on to speak. But women are basically waiting to be called on to speak in this church. I don't ever have an opportunity to be a bishop who can stand up and say the things that I really feel like need to be said, right? In my local faith community. So women have got to gain equal representation in order to have any shot at having equal voice.
Amen. And there's only one calling that I ever actually kind of wanted that I've never had, and that was to be on high council, because I thought it would be fun to see the whole stake from that perspective.
Sure.
But I would never accept that call unless they had 6 women,
Okay.
6 men. That's
Beautiful
different to me. And I never thought that before, but now I'm like, no way, I wouldn't do it, because how can us blowhard dudes represent 50% of the population that, not us?
Yeah.
But I don't
I
know.
respect that. And I also respect, I respect however people come to their genuine decisions, but I also respect that some men would accept that calling and then just push from the inside and do what they can do as well. Like one thing I've said to my husband when back in the day when he was in leadership, I've poisoned the well, so now he will not be probably ever in leadership again. But when he was, I would say, just ask yourself mentally in your head, where are the women? And then maybe, he's a quiet introvert. Maybe you'll get to the point where you can say out loud, where are the women? Why aren't there 6 other high council women here instead? Like we don't hold any keys. There's absolutely no reason why we can't have women be high counselors right now, full stop, without changing anything within the system. So, there are lots of different ways to.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because that's, make change from inside.
Right.
We need both.
Yeah.
Yeah, we definitely need both. And I also want to put a little placeholder right here to say that this is all still really complicated. Even though I have strong opinions about this stuff, I have no interest at all in ordination. I don't even really care that much about ordination for women. That's not what it's about for me. And so some people listening might be saying, oh, these are just 2, women who are stumping for ordination, and so the whole conversation gets dismissed as a result of that. And I want to say, no, this is not about that at all. But there is a huge spectrum of change that could happen within our existing doctrine, within our existing policies, and it could happen by this Sunday if we had the will to do it. We don't ever have to touch ordination for women in order to increase voice and representation and power for women within the structure.
Yep, I agree. And it can, but we don't want to.
We don't want to, obviously.
Yeah.
I don't want to believe that, Brian, that we don't want to. But what else are we led to believe?
Exactly.
Oh no, what's the phrase about the fruit that it bears?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, like I say, we could go on and on, I think, but I think we've hit the point. And what can people do? As we kind of wrap this up, and maybe some final thoughts from both of you, and then what can people do right now, other than we've talked about it, but maybe some other insight that other than just talking and listening to people and genuinely loving people and just trying to get inside their head and let them feel free enough that they can say what's on their mind.
I was just going to say talk and listen. So you hit the big 2 for me. I feel like that really is where all of this begins, within your family, within your friend group, within the classes that you're in at church, anywhere that you are. It has to begin with talking, but also listening, because creating space is it's not about privileging any set of ideas over another. It's about making room for all of the ideas that are already existing in that room. And we've got to get to that place first before we can begin to understand how to move forward together working with what we have.
I think what people can do, everyone can start doing today, is trust their inner voice. I've been taught since primary, right, that the Holy Ghost will be the teacher and the comforter and all those things. And so I think we have a really good foundation to listen to ourselves, and especially the audience that Susan and I are mainly speaking to, which is like, these are, can I say grown ass women? Like, these are,
You can say grown ass women.
okay, these are grown ass women who have raised children, who have had careers, who have kept small humans alive, who, have had all the callings. Like, these aren't women, these aren't lazy ass women who are like, meh, just hopping around the world backpacking, living in monasteries, which actually sounds fantastic.
It sounds pretty good, actually, Cynthia.
I know. But I'm just saying, like, the demographic we're speaking to are women who are trustworthy and they can trust themselves. So trust yourself when you have those voices that keep just going, this is hard for me and I want to do it differently. Like, I was just in a church meeting not too long ago where someone was saying, like, I know I'm supposed to read the Book of Mormon every day and I just can't for these reasons, but I'm going to try. I'm going to set an alarm on my phone. I'm going to do this. And I just wanted to say to her, maybe it's okay to put the Book of Mormon aside for right now. Like, you, like me, have probably read it like 35 times in your life. Those words are in my head forever. Maybe it's okay to pick up a different type of devotional book. Maybe God will meet you where you're at anyway. And so that's the number one thing that we try to get through on our podcast is you are trustworthy. You can listen to that voice inside of you. And we've been taught our whole life that if we're wrong, that the Holy Ghost will nudge us to go back, to take a different road. And that's all we're trying to say is trust yourself. And if you're wrong, then you're wrong. And then you'll learn from it. And then you'll make a different decision again. So, yeah, I don't think we say that enough in the church. I think we say trust authorities, trust bishops, trust prophets. But how often are we saying, you are good and whole and divine as you are right now. Trust you. Someone just came on our podcast recently and quoted Carolyn Pearson, who said, I have a testimony of myself. People should have a testimony of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's, yeah. My wife often won't take credit for the wonderful things she's done and the gifts she has. She always says, it's God, it's God, it's God. I'm like, no, it is. Yeah, maybe, sure.
Mm-hmm.
But you did it.
Mm.
And damn it, you need to take the credit for that. And it's okay. You're not dissing on God and not giving him the credit when you did it. Ugh, trust me. That shit is crazy.
Yeah,
but
that's hard though.
Yeah. Because that's what we're taught, and
yes.
Right.
But
right.
Yeah, what was personal revelation? Does it matter or does it not?
Exactly. I was also just in another, sorry, I'm talking so much, but
it's okay.
Just
This
in
is why
another
I had
meeting,
you here.
Well, where this woman was saying, it's the age-old dilemma. Is this my thought or is it the Holy Ghost's thought? And I'm
right.
What does it matter? If it is
Right.
good, it comes from God. What does it matter? And we're taught to experiment upon the word. So whatever voice it is, if it feels good and right and the fruits are good of it, then act on it. Well, that's the only way to know if the fruits will be good is to act on it. But I don't care one whit anymore if the thought I'm having is me or is coming from an outside source like the Holy Ghost. I don't care anymore. If it's good, I'm going to act on it. I don't need to distinguish anymore because the kingdom of God is within me. So
Didn't Bednar give a whole talk about that? About your thoughts? He did. I know he did. He's not my favorite, but I know he did. That's all. He said, if it's good, it's good.
Yeah.
Right. It's kind of a joke in my family that I'm a danger to myself and others. It's pretty much my family has always said that about me. From the time I was a kid, really, I've been a danger to myself and others because I've always been a feminist. Well, I know. But what I would say after interacting with so many women through this project, I think there are a lot of women who really believe that their inner voice is a danger to themselves and others. And I just want to tell women, you are not in danger here. Go
of
ahead
thinking.
and let yourself off the leash. Let your head off the leash as often as it wants to go. Because whatever it brings back, you're going to be able to know in your heart whether that is good, whether that tastes sweet to you. You're going to know. You're going to know that. The power is within you to know that. No one else can know that for you but you. So quit being afraid and just do the thing. You are not in danger.
Or do the thing
any of
anyway,
this.
even if you're afraid.
Well, for sure. We could have a whole episode about that,
Yes,
Cynthia,
we
because that should be my life motto.
Let's just
Never not been afraid.
do it first, think later.
There you go.
There you
I
go.
like that.
But you'll know if it was good or not. You
Yeah,
don't need an
you will.
outside authority to tell you that. That's gonna be clear to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So trust yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Ladies, this has been fun. I appreciate you so much for coming on and sharing with us and my 17 followers worldwide.
It's okay. We have a dozen.
Yeah.
Maybe
Well,
2 dozen. We may have 2 dozen.
Susan Hinckley and Cynthia Winward, hosts of the fabulous At Last She Said It podcast. Ladies, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a joy to get to know you and to share this. And I'm going to continue to be a fan.
Such
Thanks,
a
Brian.
pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you again for listening to The Parish the Thought Show. We know you have many podcast options and appreciate that you have chosen us. If you love what you hear, please give us a rating on whatever platform you find us. And don't forget to share, like, and subscribe. If you hate what you hear, only tell us. You're still here? Click on the next episode for more from The Parish the Thought Show.